Joel, what do you make of the name Koheleth or Ecclesiastes?
So first of all, it's the same word, just in two different languages, right? So
Right.
Kohelet
Yeah.
is the Hebrew name, Ecclesiastes is the Greek name. They both mean something like preacher, right? Gatherer. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, ecclesia, right? From the Greek, and Kohelet is the kahal, right? The community, the congregation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've always called it Kohelet, but that's just because I was raised calling it that. But most people, I think, know it as Ecclesiastes. The name itself doesn't seem to bear that much on the book. And in fact, for much of tradition, when they've read Kohelet or Ecclesiastes, what they said was, "Oh, you mean Solomon?" Right? Again, Solomon being connected to wisdom, surely this clearly book of wisdom must be another product of Solomon. It does seem to refer to this figure as king.
As someone who was king in Jerusalem.
But it never.
That's about as explicit as it gets.
But it never. So if you're going to have a book of wisdom and it's going to be connected with the king in Jerusalem, we might as well call that person Solomon for the sake of connecting it with the wisdom with the tradition. But it's definitely not the same Solomon who gave us Proverbs.
Well, the traditional answer to that is he did this in his old age. So we may return to that point.
Yeah.
Not that I think he did, but it's you can see how you might align it with the phase in a person's life.
I mean, what that really is getting at is the notion that Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, if there's going to be a relationship between them, Ecclesiastes seems to be responding to Proverbs, seems to be a reflection on the traditional wisdom of Proverbs, perhaps, as I think I mentioned earlier, perhaps as seen from a slightly more mature, worldly vantage point, right?
Yeah. One of the ironies of the name, it seems to me, is that either Koheleth or Ecclesiastes suggest a church person or a community person of some sort, whereas this is one of the most individualistic books in all of the Bible.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the oddities of it is that he doesn't just accept the traditional wisdom that's transmitted to him. He wants to check things out.
Yeah.
And no other wisdom teacher does that.
I mean, in a sense, it reads almost as memoir, right? That is, you can think of, right, like I traveled here and there, I looked everywhere, here's what I found, right? It's not that different from anything up to the present day, sort of in the autobiography, the sort of self-discovery.
And there may have been precedents for that. You get autobiographical inscriptions, especially associated with burials in Egypt. And some people have drawn analogies with this, be that as it may. The famous keynote at the beginning is vanity of vanities.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful word, right? The Hebrew word there, hevel, which you have to remember that vanity there is not vanity like self-regard.
Yes,
it's the same root. It's the vain root that in English becomes vanish, right? That's right. Not our vanity, but our vanishing.
Yes.
It's a word for breath, right? For nothingness, right? It's the name Abel, right? From the Cain and Abel story. It's nothing, right? Wispy, and for that to be the sentiment, again, thinking about it as in response to Proverbs, right, where there is sort of solid knowledge, right? You can go acquire knowledge, and you can acquire wealth and health. From the very beginning here, right? There's nothing lasting. There's nothing real.
Yeah.
That's
what I take to be the key point of it, is that there is nothing lasting.
Yeah.
Koheleth is an acquisitive person in ways. He talks about all the gardens. I had great works, built houses, planted vineyards, made myself gardens and parks, bought male and female slaves, slaves born into my house, great possessions of flocks and so forth, gathered silver and gold. And then what he will typically say at the end of it all is, this too is vanity and chasing after wind.
Yeah.
What makes it vanity?
If we're going to associate this with the king, it's less Solomon and more sort of Ozymandias, right? It's
Yes.
that's the sentiment here is it's really you can't take it with you.
That's exactly.
Is a large part of it, but to that extent, not just you can't take it with you, but did it really do you that much good when you had it? It's not just looking ahead to some sort of afterlife, though he certainly is aware of that as a way of thinking, but also sort of as a moral or ethical stance, right? Where Proverbs says, if you have all these things, you must have done good. Kohelet knows better. Kohelet knows that you can have things without it being a sign of your personal qualities.
Yeah, and also that they're not going to last. Now, you just mentioned that he's aware of speculation about an afterlife.
Yeah.
And that's maybe one of the most reliable indications we have of the date of the book. Now, there are a couple of Persian loanwords in it, like the word for garden, paradise.
Yeah.
So it's no earlier than the Persian period. I think a lot of people would figure that it's a bit later than that.
Yeah.
The belief in an afterlife, you only get in the Hebrew Bible in the book of Daniel. You might have it in the books of Enoch a little bit earlier, that you're beginning to have speculation about that, maybe late 3rd, early 2nd century.
I mean, a true afterlife, as opposed to sort of Isaianic eschatology, which is somewhat different. And
Very different,
yeah.
Yes, and as opposed to Sheol.
Right, which is
different
altogether.
As he will ask at some point in this, who knows whether the spirit of a man goes up and the spirit of a beast goes down? Now, the idea that the spirit of a man goes up, I think, had not been seriously entertained in Judaism before maybe the late 3rd, early 2nd century BC.
Yeah.
So that gives you a time frame. And this one, I think there is a certain amount of Greek influence, not now that we would identify words, but just in the general culture and climate.
Right. I mean, so one of the words that we often use about Ecclesiastes is skeptical.
Yes.
Which obviously has a Greek sense to it. But I wonder whether you would go so far as to say that the skepticism and borderline nihilism of Ecclesiastes is in part due to the sort of cultural context in which it was written. Do you think that, depending on how you date it, is the Greek domination, imperial domination, does it contribute to the fact that this author says, look, we don't control anything here?
I think if it contributes to it, the contribution is very indirect. Yeah. That it creates a certain world weariness. So it's not that he had read the Epicureans or anything like that. In fact, if you're looking for literary parallels, I think there are good Egyptian ones on the one hand, and then things like the story of Gilgamesh, the futility of the quest for the afterlife. But I think, more broadly, there is some new perspective that you don't really get a book like this until you get to Kohelet.
The irony being, of course, that one of the most famous lines from the book is, "There's nothing new under the sun."
Yes. Yes.
Except perhaps this.
Except perhaps this. And incidentally, in that same context, he says, the earth remains forever. Now, a couple of 100 years or two afterwards, people would say, what do you mean? Heaven and earth will pass away.
Right.
But not for Kohelet.
Right.
It's there for keeps. One of the things that he's constantly looking for is profit. Yithrona. This is a place where I think there might be Hellenistic influence in the indirect way that there was more trading, perhaps, going on. A good deal of it that we can document was trade in slaves. But in any case, there was more commercialization. I think that there was some wealth generated in Jerusalem in the Hellenistic period.
Sure.
And he's looking for a profit. And his problem is that you can't take it with you.
Yeah.
And the great thing that kind of blows in and knocks everything off course is death.
Yeah.
There's a huge shadow of death in Koheleth here.
Yeah. For him, the opposite of profit, strangely, seems to be pleasure. Right?
Yeah.
You can try and accumulate profit, but it's not going to go anywhere. So, famously, you might as well eat, drink, and be merry. Right?
Yes. Now, he'll come back to this actually late in the book as to what's the best thing to do. But he does also early in the book say that he made trial of pleasure.
Yeah.
And this too was vanity and chasing after wind. Now, I think a lot depends there on the attitude with which you go into it. If you think you're going to accomplish something by being a party animal, or whatever, this too is vanity and chasing after wind. What you need to do for Koheleth, I think, is relax.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's absolutely right. In a sense, it's another take on the moderation of Proverbs, but without sort of taken also to extend to the sort of the attitude, right? Not only should we should always pursue things in moderation, but we should moderately pursue things in moderation.
Moderation, exactly, yes. Yeah. The great positive advice in the book is in chapter 9, verses 7 and following. Go eat your bread with enjoyment and drink your wine with a merry heart. Let your garments always be white. Do not let oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your life. Whatever your hand finds to do, do with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the starkest contrasts just in tone is Ecclesiastes does seem to understand that life can be fun. Proverbs does not. Right? Proverbs is not a fun book. It's more about hard work and diligence, and you get through, and you'll be rewarded. And Kohelet is much more like you can enjoy this as it passes by.
Yeah, the great parallel to that passage in Koheleth, I think, is in the Epic of Gilgamesh, when Gilgamesh is looking for the secret of eternal life, and he stops, and a barmaid gives him a little sermon. The life that you seek, you may not have. So, enjoy what you got.
Exactly. So, if we think about Kohelet as a response to Proverbs, it clearly has a skeptical, detached, nihilistic might be too strong. I keep saying it, but I mean, when you keep saying it's all passing, it's all vanity, it's all vanishing, it's a little bit of nihilism to it. But as a response, how do you understand it to have come to, despite its dating, right? Is it literally? Is it somebody who said, "I know what traditional wisdom is, and I think it's nonsense"? One of the things we talked about was it's not so much nonsense. It's just I'm older now.
Yeah,
I'm older now. I know a little better how the world actually works as opposed to how we'd like it to work. And so here's how to live out your days at the if you can.
This reminds me of an episode when I was living in Chicago. I used to do a little Lenten series at the local church, and we did Koheleth one time. And a woman came up to me at the end of it and said, I'm a nurse. I work a lot with older people. They're all like this. So, it's what he's saying in large part is, take all this stuff in Proverbs. Okay, yeah, I checked it out. Nah.
And yet, as we sort of finish talking about it, the book ends on one of the weirdest notes of, having read 12 chapters worth of exactly what you just described. The very last lines sort of have a new voice come in and say, no, but seriously, proverbial wisdom is the way to go, right? Yeah. The old-fashioned stuff.
The end of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments.
I mean, it's almost it's almost hard to avoid the notion that somebody from the more traditional school came along and said, no, kids don't listen, right? It's like a parental guidance warning at the end.
You know, and it said actually a little bit before that, the sayings of the wise are like goads. Of anything beyond these, my child, beware. In other words, we're stuck with this. This book has a reputation. We have to keep it, but enough. We don't want anybody else speculating like this.
Right, and that again, I think, speaks to sort of the context in which all wisdom literature, even the skeptical, was transmitted, right? It's all coming down as instruction, as parental, as scribal, as sort of formal and conventional. But the nice thing is, you know, it did preserve for us Kohelet, which I think is one of the most modern and, in many ways, realistic voices in the whole canon.